Good evening. Welcome. I'm John. I'm a bookseller at Literati Bookstore in downtown Ann Arbor, Michigan. We're so pleased to welcome Stephen Policoff this evening in support of Dangerous Blues in conversation with Susan Choi. Just a quick webinar overview for our attendees. If you're just joining us, the chat is closed this evening, but you can keep the chat window open. I'll be sharing links to purchase Dangerous Blues from Literati throughout the event. And the Q&A is available to you to interact with at any time. If you have a question, please feel free to submit your question there. I'll read a selection of your questions at the conclusion of the conversation. And live transcription is available to you on your toolbar using the CC icon. If you're watching us later on YouTube, there are always links to purchase books from Literati Bookstore in the description directly below me. You can also click on the little typewriter icon here in the video to subscribe to our channel and be kept up to date with all of our at-home with Literati events and be notified once they're published to our channel. And as a reminder, you can shop for more books at literatibookstore.com to have shipped to your home anywhere in the United States. And if you live in Southeast Michigan or Ann Arbor, our doors, of course, are open to the public for in-store shopping. But most of all, we would just like to thank you for your attendance this evening or this afternoon or this morning or much later this evening, depending on where and when in the world you may be joining us. So without further ado, I'll introduce tonight's author and our interlocutor. Stephen Policoff is the author of Beautiful Somewhere Else, which won the James Jones Award and was published by Carolyn Graff. His second novel, Come Away, won the Zank Award and was published by Zank Books in 2014. He was writer-in-residence at Medicine Show Theater Ensemble, with whom he wrote Shipping Out, The Mummers Play, Ubu Rides Again, and Bound to Rise, which received an OB. He was also a freelance writer for Cosmopolitan, New Age Journal, and many other publications. He helped create Center for Creative Youth based at Wesleyan University and has taught writing at CUNY, Wesleyan, and Yale. He is currently clinical professor of writing and global liberal studies at NYU, where he has taught since 1987. Speaking with him this evening, Susan Choi is the author of the novels My Education, American Women, a person of interest and the foreign student. Her work has been a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and the PEN Faulkner Award and winner of the PEN W.G. Sebald Award and the Asian American Literary Award for fiction. With David Remnick, she co-edited Wonderful Town, New York Stories from The New Yorker. She lives in Brooklyn. Please join us in welcoming Stephen Policoff and Susan Choi into your living rooms.
Thank you. It's really nice to be virtually with Stephen at Literati, which is one of my favorite stores. Hi, Stephen from Brooklyn.
Hi, Stephen from Manhattan.
It's very funny to look into your Zoom window and see out your Manhattan window to see the sophisticated bright lights of the big city from my Brooklyn living room. So for posterity, since we're speaking to each other live on Zoom, but we may be being viewed later. It is the best possible week for the launch of your book because it is Halloween/Day of the Dead week, which couldn't be a more apt week, I think, for Dangerous Blues to join the world. So can I ask you to just dive in and read, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it?
You can, but first I must put on my reading glasses. Okay.
Good. I have reading glasses too. I'm not reading.
I'm going to read the first two very short chapters of the book. And there's not much you need to know except the narrator's name is Paul. He has an almost 12-year-old daughter, and they have just moved to New York from upstate because Paul's wife, Spring's mother, has died just before the novel begins. So, chapter 1. Should I tell Lucy? Because the first night we spent in her apartment was one of the worst nights of my life. Of course, many recent nights have vied for that accolade, even before Spring and I sublet this place. Back home in Phoenicia, I had almost gotten used to fitful sleep, stupid nightmares, and the occasional leap up from my abject bed, heart thudding in my ears. But what I wasn't used to was the sensation of being crushed, like a giant stone had been dropped onto my chest, which is how I felt a few nights ago. Will I have to get used to that too? Spring took to Lucy's apartment right away, flinging the few clothes she brought in her backpack into the unused chest at the foot of the bunk bed. She immediately began placing her beloved objects the panda she has slept with since she was 2, her journal, her Kindle, in various corners of the room, and set about digging through the small closet as if it were a site of archaeological interest. I sat on Lucy's bed and glared at the suitcases and boxes that held the detritus of our life upstate. I could not bring myself to unpack them. I was not at all sure that this sublet was a good idea. I was not at all sure what a good idea might look like. But Spring knew. She ran into the room carrying a large black box. Look what I found in the closet, Daddy. This must have belonged to Lucy's son. This is amazeballs. I don't know what that means, I said, but I had to smile just a little at her preteen, almost preternatural enthusiasm. The box declared Sung Su's deluxe magic kit in bold red letters with a drawing of a tall, thin Chinese man in a red robe pulling a devil's head from a silver bowl. Creepy, I said. Sung Su was a pal of Houdini's. I read his biography about 10 times when I was your age. Cool. She flung open the box, examined the slightly cheesy apparatus, silvery plastic coins, collapsing wand, velveteen change bag. Did you have stuff like this? Spring likes to hear about my childhood enthusiasms. She especially delights in tales of my stint as a barely competent teen magician, the amazing Paul, entertaining 7-year-olds at birthday parties throughout southern New Hampshire with my lame sleight of hand. Sort of, I said. I took the red plastic cup and magnetized balls from the box and showed her how to make the balls appear and disappear. I clumsily palmed one of the coins and almost managed to produce it from her ear. She laughed, clapped, then dashed back toward her new bedroom. I'm getting hungry, by the way, Daddy, she advised me on her way down the hall. What are we going to do about that? She wanted to explore the neighborhood, but we were both tired from our move to the city, so instead we explored the kitchen and discovered that Lucy had foreseen our dilemma. Plates of cold chicken and sesame ginger green beans were waiting for us in the refrigerator, decorated with bright pink Post-its saying, "Welcome to the neighborhood." Aunt Lucy is awesome, Spring pointed out as we sat at the round wooden table and ate the first of our many slapdash Greenwich Village meals. But she yawned as we ate and rubbed her eyes in an almost comical way, as she's done since infancy when she's sleepy. She wolfed down the chicken, picked the beans, announced she was going to bed. She unrolled her blue sleeping bag, but couldn't decide whether the top bunk, still covered with yellow legal pads and dusty diskettes from Lucy's various research projects, or the bottom bunk, which sags noticeably, was the proper place for her. A few minutes later, I poked my head in. She was sleeping on the floor, clutching the panda, cocooned in her sleeping bag. I paced around the apartment, stared out the window at the dim lamps along Mercer Street. I tried to stop myself from thinking about all the things I can't stop thinking about, but instead found myself remembering how Nadja and Spring would dance around the kitchen in Phoenicia, bellowing the words to Box of Rain and Ashes to Ashes. I could almost touch Nadja's slender arms. I could almost hear her slightly off-key voice ringing through Lucy's living room, and it gave me a terrible headache. I stumbled to the bedroom, and without even bothering to wash my sweaty face or peel off my damp clothes, I fell onto Lucy's neatly made bed and curled myself into a pathetic ball. I've always had bad dreams, lost in a forest while Spring calls out my name, Nadja in a tiny room pounding on a door trying to get out. But that night, was it only last Tuesday, occupied a whole other category of sleep disorders. Maybe it's the apartment. Maybe I should tell Lucy something is wrong with this place, because it was a dream, sure, but it felt real. It felt true. I dreamed that Nadja rose up from the borrowed bed, dancing wildly around the room. She leaped and whirled and reached out for me to join her, and I couldn't. I couldn't lift my arms, and then I couldn't lift my head, and then I was awake, or thought I was, and I couldn't open my eyes or move my hands, and there was a weight upon me, sitting on my chest, on my neck, and it was Nadja sitting on me, pressing down on me, only she was old, haggard, glowering at me, and I couldn't breathe, and I couldn't scream. Then I did scream, but the sound caught in my throat and stayed there forever. I sat up, sweat pouring from my face. I could move again. I opened my eyes, and the room was spinning. Spring was standing beside the bed. "Are you okay, Daddy-o?" she asked sleepily. "You were shouting something. Mommy's name, maybe." I wiped my face with the flowery sheet, forced a smile. "Nightmare," I murmured. "Go back to bed. I'm fine." She drifted out, clutching the panda to her chest like a shield. I sat there amid the bunched up bedding, wide awake for the rest of that long night, and the words, "I'm fine," echoed in my ears like the punchline of a very bad joke. 2. I keep trying to shake that feeling, that unease. So for only the second time, I'm leaving Spring alone in our sublet while I wander off. She's been instructed to text me what she's doing, and so in a preteen satirical way, she does, even as I dawdle in the lobby, turning on TV, eating popcorn, flopping down on floor. Bleecker Street on a Friday night is usually packed with tourists and underage drinkers, but it is the melancholy end of the summer, and even the scantily clad suburban girls who hang out at the seedy Come-Away Inn must be down at the shore or have gone back to school. I pause at the corner of McDougal Street, where old folky dives have mostly been replaced by Jell-O-shot emporiums and Vietnamese noodle bars. When I was 14, my cousin Hank dragged me down to the village, ostensibly to check out NYU and the new school, but really to dig up some drugs he couldn't manage to procure in Portsmouth. In some dimly lit dive on McDougal, we saw Dave Van Ronk, irascible and possibly drunk, singing St. James Infirmary blues. And apart from occasional pub crawls with my old friend Tommy, I never spent much time in this neighborhood. During my long post-adolescence, I did live in various dark dens around New York. My squalid Columbia grad school dump, the apartment my second wife and I were miserable in on West 82nd. I never lived in the village, but now I meander down Bleecker, seeking distraction. A gust of damp wind on McDougal blows a blue cardboard coffee cup in my face, then a small plastic bag, then some dead leaves. I stop, sputter. New York must be in some aberrant weather pattern this September, or maybe I am? Strange breezes have been following me around ever since Spring and I fled to New York from the sad house upstate. About halfway down the block, I see a white-haired man leaning against a wrought iron staircase. He's wearing a Greek fisherman's cap, absently drinking a beer. Some bluesy guitar wafts its way up the stairs that lead to a nameless basement bar. A small blackboard leaning against the stairway announces, "Used to be the Gaslight Cafe. Tonight, Tara White and the Dangerous Blues." Any good? He tips his hat at me, winks. Good? Yeah, the real deal, if you ask me. This was the place Dylan used to play. Phil Oakes, Mississippi John Hurt, all the greats. It's been dead for a while, but we're bringing it back to life. Free. Just buy the band some beer, or buy me one. He laughs, gulps down his drink. As I walk down the steps, the wind whaps at me again, and I almost trip on my own feet as I enter the dimly lit room. It looks more like a bunker than a nightclub, with wobbly chairs, scratched tables, bent bar stools, all of which look as if they might have been blown in from Bleecker Street by the same wind that is pushing me along. The air conditioner above the door whirs somewhat pointlessly. It is hot and airless in here, and I'm about to turn and make my way back up the stairs, but a low, plaintive voice and a swirl of guitar stop me. I can't quite make out the singer's face in the darkness of the club. Only one stage light is shining up at her, and the two musicians behind her on the small stage. She's tall, thin, with dark hair cascading across angular features. She's nodding her head slightly as she sings, hands clasped in back of her as if she's not quite sure what to do with them. But the song, Just Walking in the Rain, it's one I vaguely recall my mother playing when I was a child, only then it seemed kind of silly, and now it does not. I buy a vodka and stare into it. The singer's voice, dark and lovely, seems to be accompanied by the eerie whistling of air going through a vent. She sings about trying to forget and how memories torture her heart. Something about the way she sings the word heart feels like a little knife through my own heart. I'm nodding my head. I can't stop nodding my head. And I notice that I'm crying right here in the stupid used to be the Gaslight Cafe. Then the song ends and the singer is standing right next to me. Here, she says, and she hands me a napkin. Must be allergies. She's wearing an odd combination of striped shirt, polka dotted pants, and red boots. She's looking at me like she knows me. I know you, she says. I doubt it. I gulp down my vodka. New in town. Not that new. She takes a long, slow sip from a plastic cup, stirs the ice cubes with one finger. Your daughter is Spring, right? We met. No, really, we did at the Get to Know Your Kids middle school thing last month. My daughter tells me that your daughter is a bit of a mystery. Who isn't? I point out.
I love the reference in that chapter to the Come-Away Inn, which is which made me laugh with delight because it's a little bit of a wink to those of us who have read and enjoyed your two previous books, Beautiful Somewhere Else and Come Away. And one of the things that I most delighted in when I started reading Dangerous Blues was realizing that this book was also taking place in a world that I knew already from your two previous books. And I was wondering if you would talk a little bit about what relationship you want this book to have to those other books. Is it a sibling book? Is it a sequel? Everyone should, but no one needs to have read the two previous books before reading Dangerous Blues. But where does it fit?
I think sibling is kind of the right word. I mean, it's sort of a series in a weird sort of way, but it's not really. I mean, the timeline is completely messed up if you actually wanted to check it out. I mean, at the end of Beautiful Somewhere Else, Nadja is pregnant with Spring, who doesn't get born for 10 more years or something, and then 10 years after that, she's only 11. So. I mean, I thought nobody cares about that anyway. So I wasn't really concerned about the timeline so much. I have to say I was not intending to write another book with Paul and Nadja and Spring. I thought I was done with them after Come Away. And yet when things started to happen in my life that I wanted to write about, I thought, well, actually, he's a much better narrator than any other that I could come up with. He's let us say, a more unhinged version of myself. So I can give him my verbal tics and at the same time still not feel that that it's just a version of me, because it's not.
Paul's a really great narrator. I think one of the things that I love most about Paul is that as hard as he wants to kind of plod through life in a state of kind of bleak depression, like he's kind of like one of those, who's the Charlie Brown character that like always has the black storm cloud over their head? It's Charlie Brown. As much as Paul seems to want to be kind of Charlie Brown on a storm cloud day, he has this incredible capacity that's not even, I think, conscious, to find himself in situations and among people who are just who just don't allow him to sink into like the black storm cloud of his thoughts. And a lot of what happens around him is extremely unusual and even supernatural. And I was wondering, if Paul is some version of you, is Paul a way to explore your own interest in the supernatural? Like, what's going on here? There's supernatural stuff in all three books. It's one of the things I love most about them. This is a kind of a ghost story. What's your interest?
By the way, it's Pigpen who has the dark cloud over his head.
Oh, it's No, I thought Pigpen is in a dark cloud of dust of his own.
Well, okay.
Of his
Charlie
own
Brown is always
filmmaking.
depressed, though. That's true. Honestly, I'm not sure, because I'm not particularly a believer in the supernatural. I love the idea of it. I love the idea that the world contains things that we know nothing about. I would like to believe, sometimes anyway, but also for me, it seems it's just a way of trying to make things like anxiety, depression, despair, and all the things that most of us experience into something else, into something that's bigger than that, and that stands in for the weirdness of the world as it actually is.
I mean, I'm like, I literally just chuckled as you said anxiety, depression. Like, I was like, ha, ha, ha. The reason I did that is because Dangerous Blues, for a novel that's about loss and grief, and incidentally, a murderous cult, among other like amazing subplots, it is so funny. And it's not funny in a cruel or mean way at all. It's funny in this really warm way. I think all of your writing is really warm, warmly compassionate to its characters and to the reader. And I love how funny Dangerous Blues is, even when Paul is in the depths of despair. You manage to find humor without ever making us laugh. We never laugh at Paul. We always sort of laugh with Paul as he utters his mantra. His mantra is, ugh, which, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, on the page rendered like UCH and then many more H's. But how do you do you think about humor when you're writing? Is it a conscious effort on your part to inject that lightness into what's otherwise a very, very sad story, at least at the beginning, of a widowed dad and his daughter?
I think I don't consciously. I mean, I've never sat down and thought I'm going to try to make this funny. I mean, I think the combination of melancholy and humor, that is me, I think. But it's also,
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to me the way in which people can get through the world, really. I mean, what would we do if we could not also enjoy, something, the ridiculousness of human existence, basically.
Yeah, melancholy and humor. But I think one of the other, at least, for me, hallmarks of your fictional world is that the other thing that characters seem to use to get through the world and to get through their difficulties is these magnificent obsessions. Almost everyone in this book has a magnificent obsession of some kind, even extremely like, they're not even secondary characters. They're more like wonderful cameo characters. I'm thinking of Diana the juggler, who kind of like coasts into the book really briefly on roller skates and actually leaves behind this kind of transformative interest in juggling. Everyone in your book has this magnificent obsession with something. And I'm curious to know how many of those obsessions are yours. I looked up Sung Soo, who you mention in the first chapter, because I thought there's no way that this is for real. And in fact, you did base that figure on a real figure from the history of magic. And in fact, everything, I looked up tulpas, which we can talk about in a minute, because I thought like Stephen made this up. And you didn't make anything up, except there are a few things that you cop to having made up. This particular amazing blues musician whose music kind of provides the soundtrack of the book, you made him up. But I was wondering if you could talk about these magnificent obsessions that people have, and again, did you seek to find a place to put the blues, non-Western music, the history of magic, Tibetan beliefs about mentally projected phantoms, or does this stuff is this just what pops into your mind as you're writing?
A little of both. I mean, I did want all the characters to have some kind of obsession, because Paul is obsessed. I mean, he's obsessed with whether he's seeing the ghost of his dead wife. And I wanted that all the people that he met along the way were haunted by something else, even if they're not literally haunted, but obsessed, or the past is trying to catch up to them, as like the singer who's being haunted by her brothers, who are part of the murderous cult that you mentioned. The history of magic, I mean, that part is me. I was, in fact, a kid magician. And I did read the biography of Chung Ling Soo, who was the character that Sung Soo is based on. Originally, I mean, he appears in Beautiful Somewhere Else. He's one of the only other characters that appears. And I wasn't originally intending to put him into this, but then magic seemed to be part of it. And I wanted, and Paul, as you know, Paul has this history of having been a child magician. And I thought, well, okay, I'll bring him back in. And then that works towards something that happens at the end, which is a magic show that he brings spring to. Yeah, I didn't make him up. I did make him up, but I didn't completely make him up. I didn't make tulpas. Just actually, I found tulpas when I was researching ghosts and spirits, because I thought, well, what else? I made up some of that of the ghost lore, although you don't have to make it up, because anything that you could imagine has been imagined by somebody, kind of. But tulpas, I didn't know anything about tulpas until I started writing the book. And then when I found them, I thought, this is fabulous. I don't understand it, but it's fabulous. So
it is fabulous. And I think that, one of the fabulous things that happens in your book is that all of this material is loads of fun, right, for the reader. But it's also, it's not just there to entertain it. It all ends up actually functioning really beautifully on a thematic level and on a metaphorical level that I think is one of those things that you can't try to do that, or at least when I try to do that in writing, it always rings untrue, like, oh, I wonder if I can have, one of the characters who really needs to transform his own life be interested in magic, which is, a practice of creating transformative events. It feels completely natural and organic in Dangerous Blues. And I think the tulpa in particular is really, really appropriate to the story. And without spoiling the story, can you talk a little more about like the specificity of the tulpa? Like what particular kind of ghost is it?
Well, honestly, I don't really understand it myself, which is one of the things that I was interested in. If you read about it, and you can, I made up the website, whatever it's called, www.heartyourtulpa.com.
Love your tulpa. I know it's like it's a support group for people who like don't really want a tulpa in their life, and it's like, no, this could be good for you.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. The fact, I found them, I found websites about them. I found people who asked questions about whether they were imagining these things or whether they had created them. And I thought, wow, this really is fucked up. But at the same time, it's really interesting. And it does fit, since Paul's not sure whether he has evoked the ghost of Nadja by wanting her back so much. And his father-in-law, who is a specialist in occult lore, sort of eggs him on to consider the whole tulpa idea. I didn't want to go too much into depth with it, especially because it's creepy. And I feel like people who are involved in tulpa lore are there's something a little off about them. But it was really interesting to me. So that's why I put it in.
I may be misunderstanding. I may be misunderstanding it, and but I don't think it really matters, because what I took from that idea was, I think usually with ghosts, there's, at least for me, there's this kind of binary way of viewing it where you're like, is this ghost real or is it all in my head? And that idea kind of disrupted that binary where, it seems like the answer is both. Like it's both real and it's all in your head. The fact that it's all in your head doesn't actually contradict the idea that it's real, that the power of the mind and grief and desire could create this entity. And so I loved that for the role it played in your story. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the comment that you just made about how everyone in the story is haunted. You have this great, super grim kind of presiding quote from Eugene O'Neill: "There is no present or future, only the past." And it's a very appropriate quote for the book. But as you pointed out, people are haunted in all sorts of different ways. Like, can you talk a little bit about the different hauntings going on here?
I take it to be true that most people, even if they may not completely recognize it or want to recognize it, have some thing from their past that's there all the time, and they have to shove it out the way in order to function. And that's of course where the metaphor of ghosts works for me anyway. Mm-hmm. And I liked the idea that if that Paul was going to meet a bunch of people who were themselves haunted by something, and that they would mess with him on some level. And that just, in terms of the sort of the flow of, I never outline a book before I write it. I just don't know how to do that. I write lists and I write notes.
No. You're on my team. Who does outline books?
Lots of people do. Mystery writers definitely do.
Stop. Okay, we'll get to that. We're going to talk about process. I'll probably get in trouble for this. I don't trust people who outline their book, or if they outline the book and then actually follow the outline. Like I don't. Anyway, you don't outline.
I don't outline, and I mean, I kind of just wanted something that would be thematically, if you will, would push stuff along. And so, I mean, the cult, all of those things, and that stuff just seemed to be the grease, if you will, that would help slide things along.
Yeah, but it's all so good in and of itself. I mean, with the cult particularly, one of my questions for you, which I was going to hold it until later, but I'll just ask it now, was, I mean, are you laying groundwork for, another sibling book? Because I hope this isn't a spoiler, but I was left wanting a lot more of the cult. It's just, I want you to follow those people.
Well,
And
actually, I did invent that cult years ago in a book that I never was completely satisfied with, and so I just transferred them into this book.
oh
So
man,
maybe I'll go back
maybe you can now transform that other cult-centered book.
Yes, I might do that. That's definitely a possibility.
I thought that the cult was it was just one of many fantastic, like, marginal delights in this book, which is, really at its heart, and I think most wonderfully, about this dad and daughter. It's about Paul and Spring. And, for all of the kind of fantastic, like, miniaturist stuff you have going on in the margins, the cult, which seems so real and so convincing, and, the history of the blues and the history of magic. It's really Paul and Spring who give the book so much momentum, I think, because their relationship is extremely convincing. And I'm wondering if you can shed a little light on how it is that you could write such a very convincing and funny father-daughter story.
Well, my daughter does say that she doesn't have to read the book because she's in the book. And I mean,
is she being immodest, or is this basically somewhat
it's sort
true?
of true. I mean, it's I've smushed other people together, other children that I've known into Spring. But I mean, sure, she's definitely a version of my daughter when she was 11. So yeah, I mean, I'm afraid that my daughter might sue me later on, but probably not.
I don't think she will. I mean, Spring is such a wonderful character. She's so I mean, she's funny, she's effervescent, she's utterly tireless. She even sleeps energetically. Like, there's like scenes in which she sleeps, in which it seems like it's the most energetic sleep you've ever seen. But I think the thing I love about her as a character is that she's a perfect foil for Paul, because Spring is incredibly in touch with her emotions and voices them right away. And she's often just caught in a storm of emotion, whether it's joy or grief or, dismay or anticipation. She's very immediate with her emotion. And Paul is the opposite. And I wondered if I don't know, did you find that useful as a writer when you were writing scenes of the two of them together? The fact that Paul, who's this guy who's really kind of stuck, does have this very unstuck daughter to kind of, drag him out.
Yeah, I mean, that was intentional for sure. And I mean, and although there is some truth to that in terms of my actual life, I mean, I really wanted her to be, she's the more mature one in a lot of ways. And is the one, as you say, who understands, that, for example, that being haunted by her dead mother is not such a great idea. Whereas Paul is like, maybe this is a good idea. So yeah, I mean, I did definitely try to make that into a sort of a dynamic duo kind of a thing.
Yeah. And it works really beautifully. And particularly what you just said about Spring's realization early on that she can't be haunted, it's really surprising. I think there are a lot of ways in which you subvert our expectations of these characters, and that's one of them, where this motherless daughter has the wisdom to say, like, this isn't good, this is just not gonna work. I want to talk about the characters more, but I also want to talk about the setting. I love this as a New York novel. Again, I'm like looking through your Zoom window, out your Manhattan window. And one of the things that I thought was so great about the way that you use setting in this book is that your New York is totally haunted by itself. Like even in the chapter that you just read, the used to be Gaslight Inn, where the guy's like, yeah, it used to be the Gaslight, it died, but now we're trying to resurrect it. The whole city seems to be dying and experiencing its own haunting. It's haunted by its more interesting past, it would seem at times. And as a New Yorker myself, I felt a lot of melancholy reading Dangerous Blues because it made me think of all of the ways in which this city does seem to be losing itself and losing, aspects of its past that I wish it wasn't losing. And I was wondering, as a New Yorker, like, what's your thought about that? Is that the way you feel about the city?
Kinda, yeah. I mean, it's hard not to feel that way. I mean,
Yeah.
that wasn't necessarily what I was going for when I started writing the book. I mean, I've lived in New York almost all of my adult life, but I had never written about living in New York at all. So that was a consideration. I moved them down from upstate New York to the city because I thought, well, that will make it also more fun in a way for me to write about New York and about, I put them in this neighborhood, not in this building. I put them in the next building, actually, in a sublet. But it allowed me to write about, yes, I mean the hideous NYU architecture and the crappy little stores along Broadway and the Merchant's House Museum and the weirdness of Washington Square Park and all that stuff. So I mean, certainly this also the novel takes place theoretically around 10 years ago, when things were already, not great about the city, but maybe not quite as full of despair as it is now. So I think the hauntedness of New York certainly was interesting to me, though.
If we get in trouble with anybody once this recording goes up, it's probably going to be the city tourism board. We're just kidding. It's great.
Yeah, fun city.
I loved the cameo that the Merchant's House Museum makes. It's one of my favorite places in the city. And again, it really brought home that idea of the disappeared city and all of the things that we've lost, that I think places like the Merchant's House Museum, which is like this, for viewers who don't know this, is this remarkably preserved house in the middle of Manhattan, that you walk into it and it really does feel uncanny, like as if you walked through a portal. And Paul has this experience in Dangerous Blues. He walks into the Merchant's House Museum and has a terrifying encounter with the city's past. But I think in a way like that way in which you wrote about the city, for me at least, was a really beautiful enhancement of the way that you're telling Paul's story and showing us Paul's effort to figure out like a way forward. I kind of want to come back to this you never outline thing, because I delight in that disclosure. I can't believe we've never talked about this, actually. I mean, especially considering, and now I will make the exciting disclosure, that you were once my writing teacher.
Yes.
I do remember you never talking about outlining. So I do remember the absence of talking about outlining. Now, when I teach my students, when the topic of outlining comes up, I always sort of throw up my hands and go like, I don't believe in it. Do you find that you don't outline because you're just not that kind of person, or do you find that you don't do it because it's actually generative for you? Like, do you like kind of stumbling through the fog blind and kind of just seeing like what pops up that you weren't expecting?
I do like that. That is why I do. I mean,
Yeah,
it is probably also because I'm incapable of it. I mean, there is a
me too.
personality aspect of it probably as well. But I do like stumbling. I mean, that is, I mean, occasionally I think, why am I doing this? Why am I writing in this way? Why don't I know what's coming next?
Yeah,
But I do mostly like the surprises that come out.
right. Well, if you knew what was coming next, then you would never be surprised,
Well,
which is,
that's, I mean, and occasionally I've had stories, things that actually happened to me that I thought I would, make into fiction. And then I thought, but I know how it turns out. So what's the point, really?
is there something in Dangerous Blues that, without spoiling it for readers, you could share as an example of like a surprising development that the plot or the story took, that as you were writing, you were like, oh, I did not expect this.
Actually, two things. I mean, the tulpa thing, absolutely. I
Yeah.
had no idea about tulpas, and I was, I mean, I had done some research on ghost lore. I read a couple books, and I, scrolled through various weird websites and stuff. And that's how I found the tulpa thing. And I thought this absolutely fits. And
Yes.
the other thing is the magic show at the end. I did take my daughter not to see that particular character, but to the Illusionists, which is they appear every once in a while on Broadway. A bunch of very high tech magicians, and she loved it. And it was when she was little, and I thought actually this is where things have to kind of almost end. I mean, so I didn't really think about that until I was getting ready to think about how to end it, and then I thought, oh, they should go to a magic show.
Yeah. Yeah. And we won't talk too much about the ending, except that it does really, in the book, feel exactly the way you just described your own sense of discovery, where it's like, oh, of course, this is where it ends. Although to me, the book ended not too soon in that I felt unsatisfied, but there really was so much that I would have loved to have read more about. So many characters that I wanted to read more about. Not just the murderous cult evaders, and not just the murderous cultists themselves, but leaving behind like all of the things that I wanted to read more about, because I'll hope for another sibling book. Can you talk about music? Because music is a really big deal in this book too. I mean, music is referenced in the title. I mean, obviously Paul feels the blues. He is blue, like he is melancholy, but the blues, the musical tradition, is also really important to the story.
Yeah, and that was not, I mean, originally I wasn't sure that, I mean, that kind of filtered in, if you will. I mean, a little bit because of actually going to hear some music on Bleecker Street around the time that I was thinking about writing the book. And the blues itself seems so clearly, I mean, despite the fact that, as I hopefully point out in the book, it is obviously very foreign to the life that Paul has had, but still it resonates with him. And it made sense to me that it would resonate with him. And I heard a couple of songs that I had never heard before, that some people that I know actually sing. And I thought, that's pretty interesting. And then I wanted to use an actual singer, a famous blues singer, as some kind of a motif in it. But then I thought, well, I don't really know anything about what this person's life could possibly have been. So I'm going to make somebody up, basically. I mean, and I've tried, at first I thought I would do more with him. And then I thought, I think I should leave him as a ghostly figure, kind of, another sort of haunting figure in the book.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way, less is more with that character, because he's so incredibly believable as a figure about whom very little is known. Like, I think you made that figure more believable by making him a figure of mystery in the history of the blues, in terms of his own biography. At the same time, the lyrics that you wrote to attribute to this not actually real blues singer are very, very convincing.
Well, thanks.
Yeah,
I mean,
maybe you have a sideline here
I used to write song lyrics.
lyricist.
You know,
What's
that's
that?
part of, I used to write song lyrics. I mean,
Oh,
that's
you
really
did.
part of my theater thing, kind of, that, I wrote plays for a long time. That's what I originally wanted to do. And I actually, since I was a kid, I've written, weird rhyming stuff, which were somewhere between songs and poems, kind of.
So go back to this this theater interest of yours. Like, I didn't know, was it a musical theater interest? Like, would you have wanted to write
When I was
musical
about
theater?
12, apart from doing magic, I also wanted to write musicals. And
Did you pursue it beyond the age of 12?
yes, sort of. I mean, I worked with this off-Broadway theater company, Medicine Show Theater Ensemble, for quite a long time, probably before I knew you, or right around the time I knew you, actually, in the 80s, probably. Hard to believe.
Ouch.
I know. Right?
You
You
had
were
to say
young.
it.
You were young at the time.
Well,
And I did
we
write.
were both young at the time.
I wrote 2 or 3, weird musical theater pieces, not kind of conventional musicals, but weird theater theater productions, basically. So yeah.
So this is not a question I expected to ask, but given that you've spent time in the past in other genres, like, how do you feel about genre now at this stage of your writing life? Like, are there other genres or even other art forms that you'd like to work in?
Well, I've been working on a memoir for a while, which I thought I was done with, and then decided I wasn't done with. In terms of other, I mean, I loved theater. I loved being a playwright, but the problem with being a playwright is you have to deal with, actors. And
a lot of people like the collaborative aspect of theater,
I
you're like, the
it.
problem is other people.
I like it up to a point. But after a while, I got tired of it. And also, a play is never really done until it's produced. Whereas at least a book, even if it doesn't get published, is a thing, kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, I occasionally get ideas for plays again, and I think, well, maybe I'll try that again. But I mean, I'm so out of the loop in terms of, knowing people who, I could help, who would help me get it produced. It's like, I don't know. So I'm stuck with fiction right now, mostly, and narrative nonfiction.
So you're stuck with fiction and narrative nonfiction. As someone who was once your student and has now been teaching for a long time, I know you've been teaching for a long time. I'm just very curious to know what do you do in the classroom now that's exciting or that works well for you? Like, what I obviously, I'm here to steal things from you, but I remember your class vividly, and you were the first person, probably the only person I ever studied writing with, who assigned the kind of stuff that you assigned. I mean, you assigned Donald Barthelme, which I just couldn't believe, because I had discovered Barthelme as a teenager through a strange chain of events having to do with the fact that he lived in Houston, which is where I grew up. And anyway, like, I'm not trying to just make you blush, but your class was great, and that was a long time ago. But I've thought about it a lot, because as somebody who's now been teaching writing for a couple of decades, like, it's very hard to keep it new, I guess. And I'm just wondering, like, what do you do? Like, is there cool new stuff that you do that I can steal?
No, I think I'm pretty much doing the same old stuff, actually. I assigned a Donald Barthelme story to my fiction writing class this semester, and they hated it.
Really?
Maybe 1 or 2 of them didn't hate it, but they didn't like it. So, I mean, whatever.
Well,
I mean, I try to find weird stuff that I think that they won't have read. That's mostly what I look for. And then I try to take something out of that as a prompt, kind of, or a thing off which a platform that they can jump off of. That's, I don't know how to do anything else, really.
Well, trying to find weird stuff that students haven't read and then making them read it is, like, I think, one of the great gifts that you can give them as a teacher, even if they don't like it. I think that they'll probably gain something from it. One of the things that I also remember about your class that I was in was that I think it was called self-mythology, if that's possible. And
Yes.
or it was called self-mythology and something. It was a longer course title, but I think that the important thing for me about that class was the idea that writing about our own lived experience is actually possibly the most important thing we can do. I think I was still, definitely like I was young and inexperienced, but I think I still was confused by like a lot of conflicting received ideas about what we should do as writers. And, at this stage in my writing life, I've realized, and I try to tell my students this, like essentially what you taught us in that class, which was look to the self first. And I don't know, is that, I mean, you've already talked about how Paul has aspects of you and Paul's story aspects of your story. Like, do you still find that to be, I guess, the most authentic way to write?
Yeah. I mean, I don't like to write necessarily, directly out of my own experience. I like to find the thing that stands in for that thing.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, Dangerous Blues is probably the most autobiographical book I've ever written, but at the same time, it's very much none of the actual things happened to me. I mean, pretty much.
Right.
I mean, my wife died, and I had a daughter. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing that, to me, that's why do I write? I write to express that stuff and to process that stuff. Sure.
And you're trying to find, as you just said, sort of the thing that's not exactly your thing that somehow expresses the truth of your experience more fully, which is a great articulation of like what I'm always kind of trying to get at in my fiction, which is often trying to express my own experience, not through writing about my own experience. So that said, and I know we're almost out of time, if you're doing that with fiction and doing it so well, why are you writing a memoir? Like, what's the difference there? Like, what are you getting in that genre crossing?
I'm not sure. I mean, the memoir is about my older daughter who died of the terrible neurogenetic disorder when she was 20, as you know. And somehow, I mean, although Spring is a little bit of my two daughters smushed together, somehow her story, Anna's story, wanted to be told pretty much. I mean, in the way that it was. I mean, it's not a straightforward memoir. It's more like because I can't do anything straightforward, unfortunately for me. It's more like a montage as memoir, kind of. That's how I'm thinking of it anyway.
Right. But that makes sense that story, the specificity of it needs the specificity of memoir.
Yeah, that's what I think anyway.
Yeah. I think maybe it's intuitive, knowing like what the form is that the content needs to take.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think so. I mean, I just felt like it needed to be that kind of.
Before we run out of time, is there anything else that you're working on that you're willing to talk about?
No. I mean, I thought the memoir was done. It needs another draft, and I don't really want to do another draft of it because it's hard. This particular thing is hard.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm working on right now.
Well, we hope that you get it the way you want it.
Thank you.
Sometime soon, so that you can move on to the murderous cult novel after that. Have we run out of time?
We've reached the top of the hour. I don't have any questions from our surely rapt audience, other than Hillary says hi, Stephen. I want to thank you both for joining us this evening on At Home with Literati. We hope to have you both back in the store. In Susan's case, Stephen, I hope to have you in Literati Bookstore sometime in the not too distant future for your
The
next.
greatest store between two coasts.
That's too kind. Thank you so much. On the third coast, as it were. But thank you both for joining us. Hope you're well. Hope to see you at our store in the not too distant future. And all of our attendees tonight, thank you so much for being here. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. Take care, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan.
Thanks, Stephen.